We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast on a Thursday, 10:30 Eastern Time, coming to you live on rumble.com/amradpod. Appreciate you as always, guys. If you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up, follow the channel, subscribe if your heart compels you to do that. If you listen to us on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart, the audio format of this hobbyist podcast, then make sure that you give us a 5-star rating or drop a 5-star review. We appreciate that. Helps to bump us up in the algorithm. And I did mention the hobbyist aspect of the podcast. And I do have to issue my qualifier, as always, that this is a hobbyist podcast, not representing any particular agency, bureau, department of the federal government of the United States of America. I'm just here as an American expressing my First Amendment right to express my opinion on matters of the day, current events, open source information, trying to radicalize as many Americans as I can to pursue the truth, to look at things from a different angle. So appreciate you guys for joining me today on this Thursday as we're working our way through this. It's just going to be me at Real Steve Friend at GOB Actual. As an aside, guys, he's back to work. He's doing some work up in Milwaukee right now, and he's given us proof of life. Things are going a little bit unusually, but I'll have to pull back the curtain a little bit maybe in a future episode, and I'm still keeping the seat warm for GOB Actual on this hobbyist podcast because, why not? Who knows what the future holds if the one thing we've learned over the last 3+ years is that you can never really depend on a plan to work your way through 2 decades of government service, because otherwise you'll end up on a hobbyist podcast talking into a camera lens to the thralls of dozens of people on Rumble. All right, guys. What do we got in store for today? Over the weekend, we had the Pop Warner experience going on, and that is still going on for those who are curious. We got a semifinal victory for the 11U team, and finals coming up here this weekend for the 11 and under, and then also a bonus game for the 7 and under. My younger son playing in a bowl game because they don't really specifically keep score. I mean, we do because we live in Florida and winning matters, but winning and losing records don't really matter. There's not really a playoff, but everybody's entitled to an extra game. They call it a bowl game for the 7 and under division. And my wife has been a team mom for my younger son's football team. So all year long, she's making sure that the snacks are there and the water jugs are filled up, and having communications with parents and coaches to make sure that the practices are scheduled and everybody knows where we're going and when we got to be there. She's had lots of drama, and she had some more recent drama, which got me thinking about the issue of the day. So the drama for her was that there were several of the boys on the 7 and under football team that decided that they were done playing football. They don't want to play in one extra game. So, being the team mom that she is, she removed the parents of those children from the group chats where they inform them on what practices are going to be at and where and when and what they have to wear, because don't we all have enough group chats in our life? So she thought that was probably fine, but she overlooked one thing, and that is that there's a team party at the end of the year. So those parents took quite a bit of umbrage with being removed from the group chat. Now, she has a logical argument. She doesn't want to bombard them with information that's not going to be relevant to them. And is she safe in assuming that if the kids don't want to be part of the football team for the last game of the year, that they probably don't want to be part of the team party at the end of the year? I think that's a pretty logical argument to make. But she got a lot of pushback from those parents. They were very, very upset with her, and she didn't know what to do. She didn't know how to react. She presented a logical argument to people. So I pushed on her a little bit, and I said, look, you're making a logical and coherent and reasonable argument to people, but the logic doesn't matter. Now, that logical argument, that matters to me because I'm a logical person. I come from the real world. I'm right of center, I guess you could characterize my political perspectives on this hobbyist podcast. It doesn't matter to me who's making the argument. It matters that the argument itself is reasonable and logical. But In this case, you're arguing to another perspective. And politics aside, this is an emotional side. This is a side that's angry. They care that you, the source of that information, whereas I don't care about the source, they care about the source because they view you as kind of being the enemy. You represent the team that their kids don't want to be part of anymore. So they are angry at you as that representative. And they don't care about the logic of that. It's a complete appeal to emotion. So whatever you say coming out of your mouth doesn't matter to them. They just want to be angry at you. And that got me thinking about this asymmetrical argument that we have, where one side, traditionally conservative, is logically based, source doesn't matter. The other side, arguing to emotion entirely. And the source of that is very, very vital to them. And that's why you have people who purport to be conservative who say, hey, you know what? Bill Maher made a good point the other day. And he does that once a month when he wants to boost his ratings and have a bunch of people on social media say, Bill Maher sounds reasonable these days. He's playing on that sensibility. Whereas the communist left in this country, Charlie Kirk could have stood up and made the most coherent and reasonable argument possible. But just because it was him or Donald Trump or whoever is representing the evil right side of the political perspective, that is a big deal. It doesn't matter what the argument is. It doesn't matter how logical it is. You are just talking past them. And it's not a conversation that's even worth having because it doesn't hold any water with them. And, on the subject of my wife, she sent me this video and I thought through this, and I'm not going to play it, but it was a guy making several very reasonable and logical points, not in-depth arguments, but just zingers. Zingers that the Republicans love to really hold on to because it points out the hypocrisy. We're just so logical. But when you're in this argument, you can scream hypocrite all you want. It won't matter. So some of the points that I pulled out of this. If illegal aliens can help our economy, why didn't they help their own economies? Reasonable, logical. But that's not going to be met well from the other side. They're not going to say, oh, you know what? Good point. Attaboy. Maybe we should rethink our position on things. $450 billion was spent to care for illegal aliens, but $10 billion was just too expensive to put up a wall. Voter ID is racist, but somehow buying alcohol or boarding an airplane isn't racist. If we ban prayer in schools, it's because it's offensive, but drag queen story hour, we have to allow because of free speech. In America, cheating to get into college like Aunt Becky did for Operation Varsity Blues, that winds you up in jail. But if you illegally enter the country, we let you go to college for free. That's kind of illogical. And the last one is men who don't take care of their kids are deadbeat dads, but women who don't want to take care of their kids and murder them, they're just pro-choice. So you see the logic, you see the reason behind these little zingers, and anybody who pushes back on that or tries to make an argument contrary is they're a hypocrite. We don't like them. But that argument doesn't matter. It's an appeal to emotion versus an appeal to logic. And the argument in itself sets up the framework for the battlefield of ideas or the political battles that we're seeing. So I want to see the differences in the arguments and then also see the strategies that are derivative of that from one side to the other and how they're going about it. And I think that if we study what the communist left is doing, we can never, ever persuade them to come to our side. But we can learn what they're doing, and maybe what's good for the goose is good for the gander in some ways. So what are we going to talk about today? Well, an update on the human Roomba, Joe Biden, from his former press secretary who just dropped a book. The United Kingdom is attacking American free speech. FEMA was politicized even worse than we originally thought. Kids are suing the Trump administration and lawfare against the climate change agenda. ICE agents might be getting indicted in a future Democrat administration. America last with our dealings with Argentina, and an uncomfortable talk about guns and the Second Amendment. So a lot to get to today, and I did the whole build up for it. But before we get to all of it, I think we need to thank our underwriting sponsor of the day on this hobbyist podcast where we don't make any money, just support local American businesses. And we're going to do that with the OG sponsor of the American Radicals podcast, and that's the True Earth Pharmacy. Everybody should go to trueearth.co, trueearth.co. Don't forget, there's 2 E's in the middle there. Don't get screwed up. Trueearth.co. Don't need the M. You can go and check out the fertilizers that they have and the personal supplements that they have in the pharmacy spelled with an F. Guys, I can tell you personally, I can testify to the fact that the black turmeric is fantastic. It's helped to make the inflammation in my ankles from all those miles that I put on them every single morning, makes that under control. The pain is gone. It was very quick, talking 4, 5, maybe 6 days max before I felt the results of it. And I would highly encourage you all to check out everything they have there. They even have stuff for your fur babies, for your pets. And that's all at trueearth.co. And if you want to get a little bit of a discount, let them know that we sent you over there. You can use our promo code, which is AMRAD25, AMRAD25, because we are getting healthy in 2025. That'll get you a 10% off discount. So let's move through it. Got a lot to get to, and let's start with the human Roomba, where the Republicans are investigating the auto pen. Reporting from Headline USA. Headline is, House Republicans are preparing a report on Biden's use of the auto pen. The report is likely to be released in the coming weeks and claims that Joe Biden not only visibly aged while in office, but that his mental state declined, which surprises nobody. Donald Trump and Republican lawmakers have argued that improper use of the auto pen would raise the possibility that scores of Biden-era executive actions, pardons, and laws may be ruled invalid in court. Hey, no problem with me on this one. I think this is a unique way of going about challenging so much of what happened during the Biden administration. And I bring it up because I think it's actually a good example of thinking outside the box, not really worrying about the processes. I mean, they are going to issue a report, but it has to go beyond that. It can't just be a report and some cable news hits and all the Oxenfree, sorry, we can't do anything about it, but we're all about transparency. It actually has to be about accountability. So remains to be seen whether or not the Trump administration or House Republicans are going to pursue anything further. But I do think that there is an appetite there. And just wanted to bring that out because as we're talking about comparing and contrasting the sides, this was what the American people were subject to for 4 years when we are going to consider whether or not this guy was actually in charge and whether or not the documents that he signed were because he was using his best judgment or whether or not he was just an old, senile, old fool, human Roomba.
Who am I introducing next? Who's next? Thank you. Welcome to Washington. She beat Trump so badly in the debate, he's scared to death to beat her again. That's a fact. Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
Will you hold him accountable? You said you were going to hold Booth accountable.
Public will hold him accountable. You better than the press hold him accountable because you know the truth.
That was that angry old man there. And we're led to believe that he was actually in charge of all his mental faculties and those auto pen signatures. That's clearly what he wanted. And one of the chief people who's made this case and is now making the case in her book is the former press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre. So from NPR, as she's now making the rounds with a new haircut, good for you, Karine. Headline, Karine Jean-Pierre on why she left the Democrats and calls herself an independent. She's just down the middle. She sounds completely reasonable and logical. This might be an appeal for people to hear her out, people on the conservative side of the political spectrum, because it does sound good in the headline from NPR, right? She's an independent. She's like RFK Jr. now. She's like Tulsi Gabbard. She had to leave those crazy Democrats. Make sure you read all about it in her book. So let's find out what she's actually arguing, though, because the headline does not tell you. So digging into it, here's a quote from Karine Jean-Pierre. Quote, "I had not seen the president because he had been in debate prep," she said. "So the first time I actually heard him speak was while he was debating. So when I heard his voice, I thought to myself, uh-oh, he was hoarse. He kind of looked like he was sick. That's all. He just, had a cold during the debate." And this was the debate that effectively ended the Joe Biden run for re-election in 2024. And this is, I do have a clip of it. I'll just throw it up just to remind you, if you remember, how bad Joe Biden was. This is when he got all disheveled. This was in the first 15, 20 minutes of the debate when he was totally and fully methed up and able to respond. This was the best response that President Biden was able to muster.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our healthcare system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare, you'd be able to write what.
That's what they put up. That's his best. That's his best punch. He'd taken a couple weeks off. He'd gotten all those amphetamines juiced into him, gotten all the rest he needed. And the press secretary, who's an independent now, she's just a reasonable voice. She's saying that no, there was nothing wrong. And the auto pen scandal, that's nothing that a reasonable and logical person might want to take up. Now, she's also speaking about some of the scrutiny that she faced. So during these media rounds that Karine Jean-Pierre is making, she's been asked a lot about how she was a little bit too wooden and maybe didn't know her stuff because she kept looking down at the binder the entire time. Who remembers that? Now, this was the clip that she is doing on CBS Morning, and she's talking about how really in charge Joe Biden was, and mentioning just how accomplished he was as a president. And she definitely wasn't running cover for him at all. She's, again, a reasonable person who's left the Democrat Party, seen the error of her ways, and yet seems to just be running cover for herself, doing a little bit of CYA, and for her former boss.
The apparent decline of Joe Biden. You said you're a member of the inner circle and you never saw the decline. And after that, I wrote, how? Yeah. You even write, Karine, that you were on the plane with him going to the debate and you didn't see anything.
Well, when we were on the Air Force One going to the debate, you got to remember his campaign people were on the team, his family was on the team. I actually was one of those rare trips that I didn't really see him until after the debate, even though I was on the plane. So really, I want everybody to know that I take this question incredibly seriously. I do. I was his White House press secretary, which means I had a role that saw him practically every day and traveled with him.
And you saw nothing.
For more than 95%. We've always said, we're not going to say, oh, he didn't age. He aged. And he poked fun at it. We always owned up. And with age comes what happens when you get older.
Which is?
But when we talk about the mental acuity, and again, I take this very, very seriously. Yeah. I never saw anyone who wasn't there. I saw someone who was always engaged.
Oh, yeah. He was juggling knives and riding a unicycle inside the Oval Office. And to her own misgivings or her own faults as the press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, as an independent now, someone who's no longer so partisan, she's being reasonable and logical. She was really quick to claim that it was any criticism of her due to the fact that she is a black lesbian. But I'm old enough to remember some of the things, but if you aren't, maybe you're Joe Biden, maybe you can't remember 15 seconds ago whether or not you had your pudding pop or not. Here's a couple of examples of Karine Jean-Pierre when she was at the helm, answering some of the tough questions from the press as the press secretary, and sounding like a retard.
Assumption to make. That's a ridiculous assumption to make. Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you. Eric Adams, the New York mayor, is saying about these migrants in New York City, any plan that does not include stopping the flow at the border is a failed plan. So why aren't you guys stopping the flow at the border?
We are stopping the flow at the border. If anything, what the president has been able to do on his own without the help of Republicans in Congress, something that he had to do on his own again because Republicans refuse to give the funding necessary to deal with a situation, a broken immigration system that has been broken for decades. What they choose to do is play politics, but the president has put a plan that is indeed, the data showing is that it is indeed slowing down the flow of unlawful migration, and that
Sure, 30, 40, 50 million people flooding across the border. That is definitely slowed during the Joe Biden administration. And when she was asked for information where she didn't have it really at the ready, I mean, that was a word salad. She could filibuster for 45 seconds maybe and then move on to the next question. But really, when she revealed herself to be a uber talented press secretary, was when she gave the canned answer, but to the wrong question. Karine Jean-Pierre, part two.
ABC has a team right now in El Paso where local officials say there's 1,300 migrants arriving every day. We're seeing that people are sleeping on the streets because there are no beds left for people when they arrive. There's not enough buses to take them to other cities that might have capacity for them. Is that acceptable? And is there something the administration can be doing right now in a place like El Paso?
So I'll tell you exactly what the Department of Homeland Security has been doing. They've been surging resources to the region and working to quickly decompress the area. As with all individuals encountered at the border, DHS continues to expel migrants as required by court order under CDC's Title 42 authority. Those who cannot be expelled under Title 42 are screened and processed to have their claims for relief heard by an immigration judge in removal proceedings.
All right, so just reading it straight off the binder, and it wasn't even answering the question. Now, I gotta come clean with you. I kind of did the same thing that guy was doing in the video that my wife sent me there. Didn't that feel really nice? You're so much smarter than Karine Jean-Pierre. She's a retard. She's a moron. Any logical person could say that there was 30, 40, 50 million people illegally entering the country. Any person with eyeballs could see that Joe Biden was not with it, that he's a demented old human Roomba who they were leading around by the nose and then having an auto pen sign off on things that the communists wanted there. Now, I set this up because, again, it's arguing past each other because there's nothing that I could say to a communist that would convince him to come over to your side, even if it's Karine Jean-Pierre claiming to be an independent now. But that's not the argument, and that's not the question. The question is, who is she? Now, she's put out this book. She was a paid representative of the United States government, paid by you, earned about $185,000 a year. The ultimate argument to make, the push to make, the battle to fight is, who is she? And is this personnel decision just a DEI hire because she's a black lesbian? Or is there actually something more nefarious afoot? Is this the ultimate example of what the communists do in their version of warfare, political warfare, rewarding their friends and punishing their enemies? Karine Jean-Pierre is a very powerful and wealthy friend to the communists. And you wouldn't know it. I mean, other than changing her hairstyle, what is her financial situation looking like? I mean, is she going to the beauty parlor every day? Doesn't look like it. She just kind of has that Sideshow Bob hair, as my buddy Kyle Seraphin likes to point out. But the Times of India actually did. So they reported on what her finances are. Her net worth. How much does the White House press secretary earn? This was reporting back in June of this year, so she'd already left the position. As of 2025, KJP's net worth is estimated between 11 and 58, that's pretty broad, million dollars. Government salary was 185K. Her financial portfolio includes investments in stocks like Abbott Labs, Microsoft, Pfizer, and Amazon. Big, giant relationships with the federal government that I'm sure she had some inside knowledge on. Annual returns on her stock portfolio are 70%. 70%. A good returning stock portfolio is like 11 or 12. But Karine Jean-Pierre, she just plays the market. She's better than Warren Buffett. She also has a luxury car collection, includes a Jaguar worth $140,000, a $200,000 Range Rover, a Lexus, BMW, and a Bentley. Total value of all the vehicles that Karine Jean-Pierre has in her garage, $2.5 million. So the battle is not whether or not she's a DEI hire because she checked enough intersectional boxes for the communists to put up there because they're woke. It's we're rewarding our friends. And what is she doing with her $58 million net worth right now? Other than putting out a garbage book, which I'm sure the book advance was very handsome on. Those are the types of things that if you were actually interested in combating the political left in a political battle here, you would be asking and pointing out and pressuring the sort of systemic changes that needed to happen so that this person doesn't get anywhere near the microphone so she can read out of a binder and prop up an old demented fool because she wanted to personally enrich herself and get access to that information that she's used to get a 70% return on investments. Let's pull away from the human Roomba and from the Karine Jean-Pierre. Let's talk about this latest revelation I got out of the United Kingdom. Because last I checked, we beat the British twice in war so we could have a First Amendment in this country. But apparently, they're still coming after your ability to exercise your First Amendment ability to speak freely. So this is a blast in the past about 6-7 months ago where they brought in Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and J.D. Vance, Vice President, was quick to point out how the UK doesn't like free speech all that much. So we'll set this up and then lay down what the actual battle is for free speech in America.
In his remarks at the Munich Security Conference, Vice President Vance condemned free speech violations in the UK. Particularly, could you respond? What is your message?
I have an idea. We have the man right here. Come on. Let's go, JD. We're putting you on stage.
Great. Look, I said what I said, which is that we do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies. But we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British, of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
We've had free speech for a very, very long time in the United Kingdom, and it will last for a very, very long time.
So they've had lots of free speech in the United Kingdom, and they're totally not running their government like a Facebook user agreement at the moment. Which is why it shouldn't come to anybody's surprise that this was from Preston Byrne, who is an attorney for 4chan in a First Amendment defense case against not the United States government, but the British government, but it's happening in the United States. These are the sorts of battles that the communists are bringing to bear, either through their own underlings and street animals, or even these governmental institutions which are inhabited by the worst people in government, and those are the communist leftists like the Starmers. So from PrestonByrne.com, an update, the headline, the Ofcom files exposing the UK's attempt to destroy the First Amendment. Now, the Ofcom, OFCOM, is an abbreviation for the Office of Communications, a little Orwellian named office within the British government. And Mr. Byrne is a defense attorney for 4chan. 4chan operates its business entirely lawfully in the United States. No regulatory paperwork required at all. All the paperwork called for in a suit that the Ofcom, Office of Communications under the British government, is bringing against it. They expect every internet company in the world to file it and keep it in their hands and present it, even though 4chan is an American company. So Ofcom is claiming that it has power of supremacy over the U.S. Constitution, including the First Amendment, and all U.S. law. Ofcom is asserting that it is consistent with its own legal doctrine, known as the parliamentary supremacy, which holds that the UK Parliament is theoretically unlimited in its power. And because the UK passed this Online Safety Act, which I believe we covered in an episode a long time ago, they passed this a couple years ago. It says that censorship codes apply in the United States and override the US Constitution, and its censorship agency has the power to enforce these codes in America, even though it's a British law and it's an organ of the British government operating in the UK, and 4chan is an American company operating in the United States. The argument that the communists are making from the UK is that their authority supersedes our own. So these people are in these positions, not just our own government, and they are exerting the forces, using the levers of power at their fingertips to reward their friends, punish their enemies, to push the political change that they want. Has there been any pushback from the conservatives, quote unquote, who are in charge? I mean, J.D. Vance did a nice job of articulating it. What's the air cover, though? Karine Jean-Pierre is profiting quite handsomely from a lot of these tech companies, but beyond just watching their stock value go up, is the United States government prepared to defend companies like the 4chans, like even the Amazons, as evil as they are? They're American-based, against foreign intrusion that's trying and attempting to inhibit the rights of the individuals who are using these software platforms, or the owners of the platforms themselves, to use them how they see fit. What's the level of protection that they have there? And is there perhaps a way to respond? I mean, is the United States prepared to just slap them on the wrist verbally when they bring in the prime minister to a Oval Office to get a chuckle out of the media there? Or are they prepared to do something like implement some sort of tariffs or regulations that are going to hurt those governments because they feel like they have a supremacy over our own functioning republic, which is coming up on 250 years old? Where's the response to that? We can make the logical argument that, well, I mean, certainly your laws don't apply here. That's irrational. That's illogical, totally unreasonable. The communists don't care. They're mad at 4chan. It gives them a case of the bad feels, and they're trying to, through lawfare, hurt them financially, be it through just having to defend themselves. Now, this guy Byrne, he's defending 4chan, I believe, pro bono, but are smaller networks and software platforms going to have the same protection? And if they don't have the finances, they're going to have to bend the knee unless the big bad American government's prepared to go in and actually provide the protection, and do so using the levers at its own fingertips to push back on communists in countries who we've beaten twice in war. Now, away from across the pond and back here in America, talking about levers of power, there was a story that was going on in the very lead up to the 2024 elections about FEMA, because we had the hurricane come through Western North Carolina, but the worst in Western North Carolina. There are other areas that were impacted, and FEMA was going out, sending representatives to provide aid. And the story was circulated that if people had MAGA signs or flags or something that indicated that they were right of center, that FEMA was just straight up not going to provide any sort of care, which I oppose FEMA in general as a principle, but I am outvoted in that, in this theoretical democracy that we have with a constitutional republic where the people want those things. And here's a reminder of what went on with the FEMA representative and the logic that was behind their decisions to punish their political enemies. Give her a play as a reminder for the way the communists think. All emotion, all about reward your friends, punish your enemies.
But why should the team get to decide if they feel comfortable or not going to a particular home based on political support?
Based on their encounters, if they have valid reason to feel uncomfortable, and that's based on if you have ammunition signs outside your home with purple paint, if you approach with aggressive posturing, if you accuse us of government conspiracies and advocate strongly, they have the right to disengage. Yeah. I sent your studio over the hostile encounter procedures from FEMA. It's vaguely written if you really look at it. But the first thing it does discuss is avoidance, then methods of de-escalation, and then the last statement again goes back to avoidance. So again, it's a collective effort in order for everyone to feel comfortable in order to render the servitude.
I'll pause it there. Did you catch what she said? The policies are very vaguely written. Lots of wiggle room in there. Now, if you're a logical person, if you're a process person, like so many are on the political right, you would think, well, certainly people who are in public service, just good patriotic Americans who want to help their fellow man, help their fellow citizen, protect them against fraud and force, lend a hand up to people who are on hard times. They would never weaponize this. That's a completely reasonable thing to presume if you're not a communist, like so many are within FEMA here. So Matt Taibbi, who's an acquaintance, was able to sit down with Matt a couple of different times. He's a really good guy. He recently reported on the update to this story because it wasn't limited to what went on with this one FEMA representative who was out there. And she did actually blame it from going up the chain of command. But there's been a study done now by the Privacy Office of the Department of Homeland Security. Your government's too big. They released a review of this entire episode, the broader issue of using disaster relief to collect political intelligence, which is actually a violation of the Privacy Act. They're not supposed to do it. And yet they did it anyway. The Disaster Survivor Assistance Field Operations Guide, as that woman there pointed out, it has this term hostile in it, but doesn't really provide a definition. So somebody walks up and there's a rabid dog. Okay, that's hostile. Somebody walks up and says, in this house, we believe, etc., etc. Well, if your political beliefs are contrary, you might think it's pretty hostile. So there's a lot of gray area there, and it wasn't limited to just Hurricane Milton. That was in 2024. In fact, FEMA, and this is a quote from the report from, again, the Privacy Office of the Department of Homeland Security, quote, FEMA impermissibly collected prohibited information at least dating back to Hurricane Ida in September of 2021. Some examples cited, October 2021, quote, homeowner had a sign that stated, this is Trump country, which was documented and reported up, and I'm sure that person was probably labeled as an anti-government, anti-authority, violent extremist, white supremacist, racially motivated violent extremist. Other ones in September of 2021, all again during the Human Roomba's tenure, when he was completely with it, no auto pen signage at all. Quote, a lot of political flags, posters, etc. F Joe Biden, MAGA 2024. Joe Biden sucks, Trump 2024. We do not recommend anyone visiting this location. November of 2024, there was, quote, there was a political flyer, so I didn't leave a FEMA brochure. This is the appeal of the left. They seize these institutions of power, these choke points whenever they can, and they use it to punish their enemies. And there was an update to the more recent one that happened, where we had Jack Smith subpoenaing 8 different United States senators, their phone information, and they took quite a bit of umbrage, and justifiably so, but they were demanding accountability. Accountability being what? Special investigations, a special investigator, maybe who could take just long enough to go outside of any sort of statute of limitations for a conspiracy against rights, spend millions of dollars and selectively leak a little bit of a nugget here or there so the Josh Hawleys of the world could go on to Fox News, cable news tonight and talk about how we're getting to the bottom of things. Then at the end, we would have a strongly worded letter issued out of a senatorial committee and nobody would be held accountable. Well, now we've had an update. There's been a 9th person reporting from Axios. This is the big scoop. Ted Cruz, the 9th member now who's found out that his phone records were targeted by Jack Smith. Newly reported subpoena requested records associated with Ted Cruz's cell phone from January 4th through January 7th, 2021, trying to lump him in with the J6 narrative. Disclosure makes Ted Cruz the 9th Republican senator for whom the DOJ sought phone records. This is how they play. And I'm laying these out so we can get an appreciation and a reminder for what they're willing to do. And we're not willing to do that. We're not willing to jeopardize the justice system. We should see it for what it is. The DOJ is probably polluted beyond belief now, beyond any sort of redemption. So there needs to be a I think, and I would argue, a serious consideration for if these institutions have proven themselves to be irredeemably broken, corrupted, weaponized, politicized, then we probably need to control alt delete. I'm not saying we get rid of a Department of Justice entirely. I'm saying we probably need to rethink the way it operates and control alt delete, reset it to something completely different. And the way it functions and the guardrails that exist, we need to take the teeth out of the attack dog. But these are the arguments that I've made before, because we can't have a functioning social compact, a constitutional republic, a small r Republican form of government in which those apparatuses are used against your political enemies and expect to avoid a kinetic conflict, another civil war. I want to point out, though, other ways that we have political warfare occurring because we exist in this asymmetrical battle, this asymmetrical argument. And let's take note and see if maybe we can learn something from the communists and apply these in a way that is completely legal and is, I think, comporting quite nicely for a way that we can have a mutually assured destruction outside of an actual kinetic civil war. So the first one, an example I want to go to is from the New York Times, which was at one point a newspaper. Headline: "The kids who sued Trump just lost big in court." Or did they? They lost bigly, I'm sure. The report says that 22 young people, led by this organization that is called Our Children's Trust, sued the federal government, argued that 3 of President Trump's executive orders promoted fossil fuels were going to intensify climate change and threaten their health, and it violated their constitutional guarantee of life and liberty. Well, that's unreasonable, illogical, irrational. But that doesn't matter to communists. They're going to make the case anyway, right? Now, fortunately, it looks like the judge just immediately tossed this, and they're going to evolve the Trump administration. The strategy of filing climate lawsuits with children and young people as plaintiffs has become a fixture of the legal landscape worldwide in recent years. Young plaintiffs can raise difficult questions about when or how aggressively to go about cross-examining them. So the cross-examiner feels a little bit guilty dunking on an elementary school kid, and that helps with the legal argument that the radical leftist communist is trying to make. For example, in a Montana case thrown out in this article, the DOJ declined to cross-examine 2 of the underage plaintiffs. They were 17 and 11. It was a 2-day hearing. So, in effect, the communists pulled on the heartstrings and used emotion, and it worked. They were trying to make an irrational and illogical argument and succeeded in doing it because they know it works, even against people who are more inclined to be logically and reasonably based. And I think I threw up the wrong headline for. There it is. I had the wrong article up there. Sorry about that, guys. So this is the New York Times headline: "The kids who sued Trump just lost big in court." Or did they? Well, I think they're learning their lesson. And they're going to continue to use the strategies that work, even if those strategies on their face wouldn't seem to work, because they're arguing to their political opponents who are more reasonably based, don't really consider the source to be of paramount concern, don't really consider the emotion to be a paramount concern. Well, apparently, to a certain extent, it is. And you have these organizations like Our Children's Trust who are willing to exploit children in order to get their political outcomes that they believe are important. And this organization, Our Children's Trust, their total revenue most recently that I saw was 2023. They brought in $5 million of donations. 3.6 million was used to pay out salaries. So you have communists, again, rewarding their friends to punish their enemies. It's a giant boondoggle that almost all the money went to just pay themselves money so that they could exploit children and bring them to court in these frivolous lawsuits. So $5 million in the door, $3.5 million out in salaries. But who are they hiring to make climate change arguments? They have 1 scientist on staff. Now, and along the lines of these frivolous, nonsensical, climate-based lawsuits, Are they nonsensical, though? Is there an ulterior motive behind it? Which is the second one I wanted, which was out of National Review headline. Lawyer behind Colorado climate suit says, the quiet part out loud, litigation is a tax on oil companies and consumers. There's a method to their madness. This attorney, his name is David Bookbinder. Maybe he should be the press secretary, director of law and policy at the Environmental Integrity Project. He worked for years on a legal team that brought a lawsuit on behalf of the county of Boulder, Colorado, and they alleged two major energy companies concealed the impact of their products would have on the climate and are therefore liable for resulting damage to the county. They're doing the Aaron Brockovich argument, and they can make the argument in court, but as he kind of pulled back the veil, he issued a statement here. The quote is, essentially, the tort liability is an indirect carbon tax. You sue an oil company is liable. The oil company then passes that liability on to people who are buying its products. In some sense, it's the most efficient way that people who buy those products are now going to be paying for the cost imposed by those products. So there's two elements here. They are forcing the oil company in this case, or whatever their target is, to incur tremendous legal expenses, because these suits can go on for a long time, and they have attorneys on retainer, but there's enormous legal expenses. And do you think the company is going to incur those and just absorb that, or are they going to pass it on to the consumer when they sell their product, whatever the product is? If it's oil, gas, coal, some widget, whatever it is, that gets passed on to the consumer so they can absorb that cost. So now your consumers are paying a premium on the product that they're buying. It's basically like a hidden tax. And on top of that, let's say that these crazy climate communist leftist Gaia worshippers actually win, Aaron Brockovich style, in court, and there's a huge verdict against the company. Again, the company's not going to just pull that out of the bank and pay it off. I mean, they have some modicum of reserves in case of there's a legal liability, but it's not going to be sufficient. So they're going to raise their costs. So now again, the consumers are paying it. And at the end of it all, the entire time, what has the communist leftist attorney who's sued here in this case here on behalf, they allege, of the county of Boulder, they wanted to sue the oil company because the parties who were involved, these environmentalists, want a carbon tax. They want the government to impose a tax, and the government's not willing to do it. But effectively, they've done that by bringing the high legal costs, by winning the judgments. They got what they wanted at the end of things by thinking outside the box, even if their argument is completely irrational and unreasonable. Yeah, the on its face argument is, but the mechanism, the processes are very dialed in. So that's what I wanted to bring up when I connect the dot here and say, that makes sense to me. That's a reasonable way to bring about your evil, diabolical plan. So how do we do that on the conservative side of things? Because we don't want to use the government. We want the government out of our lives. And we're in the business of free markets. We don't like to go after individual companies that much. We're sort of averse to that. We say, you know what? I'm just not going to buy Nike because they gave Colin Kaepernick a bunch of money to go out there and say that America's racist, even though he's a black kid who got adopted by a white family and elevated to places where he didn't have to pay for a college education and was paid billions of dollars to play a game. That's just too far for me. So you know what? In our house, we're going to put the sign out that says we don't buy Nike. So maybe FEMA won't come by and provide us aid in the unlikely chance that a hurricane knocks off our roof. But we have to go a little bit further than that. We have to embrace their version of political warfare. So what would be a good example? Because do we want to pick Bud Light and their piss water because they put Dylan Mulvaney on the can? Look, I don't drink it anyway, but all right, we can go out a Bud Light, but is that really going to endure? I got a cause that I think that we can all get behind. How about the transing of the kids? Is anybody excited about that on our side? And we have the science to back it up. So I found this, and this is from the Center for Heterodox Social Science. And it's a study that was done. It's actually a report on multiple studies. The headline is The Decline of Trans and Queer Identity Among Young Americans. We have the science on our side here, and I'll even throw up this image. It's share of students not identifying as male or female. It's a 10-year length of time. So you can see it's 2% in 2016, and then it spiked right around 2023 between like 8 and 10%, and then it's starting to come back down. So here are the key takeaways. One survey from this year of more than 50,000 undergraduates in college found that only 3.5% identified as non-binary. That's down from 5.2% and 6.8% in 2022, 2023. That's a big drop, over half. At Andover, 3% of students in this year identified as a gender other than male or female, compared with 7.5%, because it was totally not a social contagion that people were doing to get attention to say that they were stunning and brave. Brown University saw a similar decline from 5% 3 years ago to now 2.5%. And also, the percentage of students reporting anxiety dropped from 40% 2 years ago to 30%. That's a 25% drop. And the number fell from depression of 15 to 10%. So people are feeling better, less anxious, less depressed, less of believing that if they identify as an attack helicopter, then they are. That means that we're voting culturally in a good direction. So to connect it to the nuisance lawsuits that are coming about, where they're saying that, well, by producing oil, you're hurting us. It's a nuisance, like a homeless encampment that we need to remove. Why don't we bring that against Big Pharma? What about all these hospitals and these psychiatrists and doctors who are seizing onto kids who many times are on the spectrum of autism and get very obsessed and are suggestible to inject themselves with off-brand, off-label hormones, and then eventually cut off their penis and testicles or healthy breast tissue? And if you cut off the twig and berries, by the way, that's a permanent hole that has to be maintained continually. So you're basically on the hook of the medical industrial complex for the rest of your life. You're dollar bills to them and the pharmaceutical companies that are continuing to push this out. What about the journals, the quote unquote experts who have pushed out how, well, you know, gender is a spectrum, even though we know forever until about 15 minutes ago that that is an illogical, irrational, unreasonable statement to make. Where's the lawsuit there? I would bet we could probably crowdsource that. We could probably stand up our own version of that garbage institution that was going after and exploiting children. What were they called again? It's escaping me. Oh, don't worry about it. Similarly, there's on the subject of exploiting children and how they just don't stop. There was another report that recently came out that pertained to books, and was the point that I made early on, that we can't have the 10 Commandments, we can't have discussions of God or a Bible in school because it's offensive, but we have to allow the drag queen story hour because of free speech. Well, because we're so back and so base now, the American military was starting to remove a lot of books from schools that were situated on military bases that were inappropriate for K through 12 education. But now, thanks to a Biden-appointed judge, a lot of those books are getting put back on the shelves. This is reporting from NPR. Books about race and gender to be returned to school libraries on some military bases. Now, in April, 12 students at schools on military bases in Virginia, Kentucky, Italy, and Japan claimed their First Amendment rights had been violated because 600 books were removed from the Department of Defense, well, now Department of War, education activity schools they attend. I'm sure that these students were definitely behind this. This totally wasn't being exploited by some leftist communist legal action. The books removed from the school libraries at military bases covered topics like sexual identity, racism, LGBTQAI plus 2S underscore hashtag asterisk rainbow kamikaze pride. And they also want to throw in, because it's NPR, that a couple of schools canceled Black History Month and another one canceled Holocaust Remembrance Day. I can almost guarantee that that was done by a leftist with malicious compliance, where they were following the letter of the directive from the Secretary of War or the president and interpreting it the way they wanted to, so they could do that and then make the argument of, see, they made me cancel Holocaust Remembrance. They're anti-Semites. Or see, we cancel Black History Month because they're just big R racists. But for the purposes of what we're talking about here, 600 books were removed. And they're putting them back on the shelves because the communists never stop. This is a function of their tenacity. This is a function of their emotion. If you truly believed to your core that your children were being abused by not being able to read about how they could cut off their testicles, would you not fight to your dying breath? Even if it is illogical and irrational, you could say, look, that has no place in a system of learning where we're trying to teach the kids how to read and write and do arithmetic. No, I mean, this is a cause. This is a religion. This is a crusade. Now, I went through the actual lawsuit, and only one page that I pulled up, because it's 600 books. I'm not going to belabor it too long for you. But this is page 1 of the books that were removed that are now, by a Biden appointed judge, going to be put back on the shelves. And I'll just read off a couple of the titles. Hashtag Black Lives Matter, protesting racism. Hashtag Pride, championing LGBTQ rights. 10,000 dresses, about drag queens, by the way. A Girl's Guide to Joining the Resistance, a feminist handbook on fighting for good. A is for activist, a history of racism in America. A Smart Girl's Guide to Race and Inclusion, standing up to racism and building a better world. Activist athletes, when sports and politics mix. Just ask Colin Kaepernick how that worked out for him. All bodies are wonderful. All boys aren't blue, a memoir manifesto. All kinds of other. If you haven't noticed, this is alphabetical, so a lot of A's in there. Those are the books. So again, not good enough. Not good enough for them to accept a directive from the Department of War, from the secretary there, from the president. They continue to fight it out in the legal courts, and it's going to put us all through the ringer, because we're going to have to finance it, a legal defense as it is. We could do the same thing here. Talked about going after big pharma, talked about going after these medical journals. Let's go after the school systems. These local jurisdictions where they have communists on the school board who are continuing to propagate these myths that you can change your mutable characteristics, like your gender, aka sex, because you just feel different today. How about if you put that on there? We go after the school board. What about we find out, because normally it's not a full-time gig to be a school board member, find out where you're working. Maybe we should go after you. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. I bet we could probably, again, crowdsource that. And again, to the communists, because again, willing to use the levers of power. There will come a time. I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news. Sorry, not sorry. This is your dad's show, after all, not your mommy's show, giving you the straight dope on this hobbyist podcast about what your expectations should be. We didn't win the game because a certain person won an election. The battle never stops. You see the communists who are willing to fight even when the winds of political change have come in and brought in a different power into authority during an election, and they've issued out lawful directives, and you could see that people's preferences on things and how we're no longer declaring that we're non-binary, the culture is shifting. It's never enough. The emotion is there, and they will continue to fight on those issues. And then when they do get back into power, they're not going to hesitate to use it to go after their enemies. Their enemies now are ICE. So Representative Dan Goldman just came out. He's Representative Levi Strauss heir, bought his seat. He calls for ICE agents to be arrested. This will happen in a future administration. Mark my words. In a letter to the New York Police Department Commissioner, Representative Dan Goldman ripped U.S. Immigrations and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection officers as, quote, outrageous and unlawful conduct in cities around the country, saying that they have been violently and improperly arresting U.S. citizens. NFI from Representative Goldman on that one. But it doesn't matter. He's just making the appeal to emotion. Goldman said that with the likely possibility that the Department of Homeland Security will send armies of agents to New York City for civil rights immigration purposes, he urged the New York Police Department to be prepared to strictly enforce state and local laws, even though there's a supremacy clause and ICE is allowed to operate wherever it wants. And they want to hold federal agents accountable for any unlawful actions they engage in, including potentially through arrest and prosecution for felony violations. So qualified immunity be damned. It doesn't matter in New York City for the Dan Goldmans of the world. They want to hold them accountable now, but they're going to be a little bit more pragmatic, particularly the Goldmans of the world. He will wait and bide his time so that when you have a president American psycho in there, people who are now stepping up and applying in record numbers, I believe I recently saw that over 200,000 people are applying to work for ICE because they believe in the mission, because it is a huge mission, and removing illegal aliens from the country was one of the giant mandates that we got during the last election. And it's a objectively good thing to do to remove people who illegally crossed into our country and are sucking us dry and taking jobs, and violence is going on in these major cities. That doesn't matter, because the Dan Goldmans of the world, when they get into positions of power and when they have somebody who is in the White House to comports with their particular ideology or is willing to at least go along to maintain their power through a coalition of activists and Marxists and anarchists and just overall crazy people and people that believe that the sun monster is angry at us, all of it, they'll use those positions of power. And that gets us closer to what we had the video about. And just as a reminder, that we're getting closer and closer to an 1861 movement, and just too many people are blissfully ignorant, bebopping along and thinking that we're so back and so based. Victor Davis Hanson says it better than me, and just as a refresher, this is what we could be looking at, a neo-confederacy.
There's been a lot of news lately about the efforts of the Border Patrol and the Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE. I want to remind everybody how that works out in reality. In many cities, there is organized resistance. But what's really disturbing is we're starting to see a new, I would call it a neo-Confederate secessionist ideology in these cities. The officials who run them, the mayors or the police chiefs, believe there are a law unto themselves. Sometimes it's very violent by Antifa, are encouraged by the Democratic Party. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom or Governor Pritzker of Chicago. They can nullify all federal laws. And when we get to that point, we're really on the verge of civil insurrection, just in the way that South Carolina is on the eve of the Civil War.
Not good, not good, but we have to be prepared for that eventuality, and right now lay the groundwork for any sort of potential defense for it. It's not just a matter of sending in the ICE agents or the Customs Border Protection guys in there, even the National Guard in there. There needs to be some thought process anticipating what the reaction is going to be, not just in the immediate future from the people who are going to go to the streets and riot and throw bricks, but what is the political class prepared to do in order to maintain their power, because they aspire to hold more and to hold that coalition together. I don't know if maybe the people that are at the helm right now have thought that through. I'm certainly not seeing anything opposed to that. Now, what I do see them doing, though, is making a mistake on the argument side of things. So I laid it out in the beginning. People right of center, they're more worried about the logic. They're not really worried about the source. People on the political left, they tend to be emotionally driven. They care very much where it's coming from, which is why I'm kind of scratching my head about making Argentina great, because this seems like a fail across the board, because you're not looking at the perspectives here. You're making a argument that ordinarily would appeal to the emotional, but because it's coming from the wrong source, it's going to wind up not landing to the political left. And because it's irrational and illogical, and regardless who says it, it's not going to appeal to the political right. So what am I talking about? Apparently, the United States government is uber concerned about Argentina. So I've got a couple pieces here. First one from the BBC. The U.S. is kicking off a controversial financial rescue plan for Argentina. They purchased Argentine pesos. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced the U.S. had finalized terms of a planned $20 billion financial rescue for the country. And actually, subsequently, we're now trying to raise $20 more billion from the private sector to help the Argentinian government out because they're facing a financial crisis for political reasons. I haven't seen the logical reasoning behind this. I haven't seen the America First argument, particularly when it's coming from the United States president, who ran on Make America Great Again, America First. I don't think that this is going to resonate really well, but here is the president.
Election is coming up very soon. Your poll numbers I hear are pretty good, but I think they'll be better after this. And you know, our approvals are somewhat subject to who wins the election. If the president doesn't win, I know the person that he'd be running against, I believe, probably. We probably have the person. A person is extremely far left and a philosophy that got Argentina into this problem in the first place. So we would not be generous with Argentina if that happened. If he loses, we are not going to be generous with Argentina.
That kind of seems like election interference coming from one of the guys who was screaming about election interference in America. That doesn't hit. It's just the same. Similarly, it doesn't hit that apparently the Trump administration is interested in buying a whole bunch of beef from Argentina. So we're going to give them a bunch of money, and then we're going to give them more money to buy their beef when we have American farmers who are trying to sell their beef here. This is coming from The Hill. Headline: Trump suggests the U.S. will buy Argentine beef to bring down prices for American consumers. All right, well, the latter half of that headline, I guess you could say, hey, I'm trying to help the consumers out. They're getting killed. But that's not really the case that the president winds up making when he's asked about it. He appeals to emotion, and because he's making a almost left-wing style argument, it's not going to appeal to his base. And because it's him, it will not be well received by the left. It'll actually wind up just kind of pissing off everybody. But here's the president.
Question is, what do you have to say to U.S. farmers who feel that the deal is benefiting Argentina more than it is them, as they are a
Argentina's fighting for its life, young lady. You don't know anything about it. They're fighting for their life. Nothing's benefiting Argentina. They're fighting for their life. You understand what that means? They have no money. They have no anything. They're fighting so hard to survive. If I can help them survive in a free world, I happen to like the president of Argentina. I think he's trying to do the best he can. But don't make it sound like they're doing great. They are dying. All right?
It sounds to me like you're just trying to help out your buddy, which is not going to answer. That's not going to make anybody happy. Have you checked on who the people were who pulled the lever for you? I mean, you can make an economic argument. They tried to in The Hill there. We're trying to, in this time of inflation, maybe bring down prices, and certain decisions have to be made, and certain industries are going to have to tighten the belt. But that's not the argument he's making. It's a fail argument that's just going to anger his political base and not rally support to him because he's mean and orange and literally Hitler. It's not going to rally anybody from the left. It's just going to fall on deaf ears. And at worst, it's going to really anger people who had high hopes for a Trump administration. I can think of no group that I would imagine supported the president in his electoral prospects more than people who are ranchers. So this comes from the NCBA, and that stands for the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. NCBA's family farmers and ranchers have numerous concerns with importing more Argentinian beef to lower prices for consumers. Now, look, before I read further, they're very interested in making lots of money, so hardly an impartial perspective. But what is their perspective? Is it logical? Is it rational? Or is it emotional? Let's find out. The plan only creates chaos at a critical time of year for the American cattle producers while doing nothing to lower grocery store prices. In the past 5 years, Argentina has sold more than $800 million of beef to the United States. By comparison, the U.S. has sold $7 million worth of beef to Argentina. Argentina also has a history of foot and mouth disease, which, if brought to the United States, could decimate our domestic livestock production. I think that they thread the needle quite nicely. I mean, they mentioned chaos and this time of year and our families. It's still sufficiently emotional. But then they made a case about a trade imbalance and a health concern. That seems like a more cognizant and coherent argument. And you can't just say, well, I feel bad for my buddy and we need to throw him $40 billion and threaten his election. If it doesn't go the way, then we're just not going to provide any aid. I think the better argument to make is we feel terrible for your situation. We can emote and we can be empathetic to a certain extent, more sympathetic to that. But we have 350 million citizens in this country who are hurting right now. And I don't think it helps for us to send our treasure to your coffers. And then also it sets up an additional trap from the political left, communists, to, on the back of this beef deal, make another argument that they always continue pushing. And if it's oil, if it's the cow farts, whatever it is, it gets the Gaia sun monster angry at us. So you know what you really need to do? You probably need to eat the bugs. So from the Washington Post, which democracy dies in darkness, headline: your diet's impact on the planet depends on where you live. Look up your city. This is a great resource that WAPO, because Democracy Dies in Darkness, has provided to you. So for the first time, researchers calculated the planet warming pollution emitted from raising beef, pork, and chicken, and they have a carbon, quote, hoof print for you. Oh, that's so cute. So eating a steak or a burger in Milwaukee, where the meat comes from nearby, generates fewer carbon emissions in Oklahoma City, where the beef tends to come from feedlots. Some cattle operators near McAllen, Texas, store cow manure in open lagoons and releases methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas, into the atmosphere. Grazing cattle in Kansas and Nebraska generates more emissions than other livestock since it takes them longer to gain weight. On average, 73%, almost 3 in 4 of every city's hoof print comes down to beef. Average American eats 5 servings of beef a week, but you should cut it down to 2, according to the Washington Post. More affordable to eat chicken, pork, or tofu. It's an effective way to curb your carbon footprint. Again, they're making the emotional argument. Don't you want to save the planet? And now they have some air cover from an American president as he's going to aid in the Argentinian government and get some pushback from the Americans, who the left will argue, well, they just want beef prices to stay high. Well, beef prices are too high. You should just transition to something a little bit better for the planet, better for your wallet. The entire thing, making Argentina great, is not going to land with the American people. I expect the president to probably pivot off of it unless he is just hell-bent on helping his buddy out in Argentina. But I think that he's a better gauger of the American people. If Donald Trump seems to me to be the sort that can kind of pick up on the vibe, maybe lick his finger, put it in the wind and see where the emotions are, where the base is. And I think the base is going to be very displeased with this. And I think we'll see him pivot away and try to make American beef great again. So poorly handled in one South American country, but another, chef's kiss. This comes from now the New York Times. And again, we're staying on the subject of making the argument, using the levers of power, and trying to appease the people who are reasonably minded and logical and not relying heavily on the emotional side of things because those people are not gettable to your perspective. So, from the New York Times, at one point, a newspaper, Colombia's leader accuses the United States of murder, prompting Trump to halt aid. President Gustavo Petro of Colombia accused the U.S. of murdering a fisherman in an attack on a boat that American authorities claimed was carrying illicit drugs. President Trump responded by accusing Mr. Petro of not doing enough to curb the production of illegal drugs, called him an illegal drug dealer and a fresh mouth. Trump also said that the U.S. would halt aid payments to Colombia, which is long ranked among the largest recipients worldwide of U.S. assistance. He later told reporters on Air Force One, this is what you're... No more foreign aid. Don't tell us your sob stories. We're America first. We're America only. That will play. That plays in Peoria. Not the, I want to help my buddy in Argentina. America first, America only. We're about protecting American citizens against fraud and force and illicit narcotics. We're about keeping our treasure here. That makes sense. And regardless of the economic aspect of it, whether or not securing Colombia or giving them some sort of counter narcotics foreign aid to push back on the drug lords, it hasn't worked. Pull it back. Use the $10 billion to build the wall and not worry about the $450 billion that the Biden administration was prepared to give to illegal aliens. That case can be made. The emotions are completely removed of it. You'll never get the emotional, empathetic left on your side anyway. You might as well appease those who are more inclined to support your position on things, because if you lose them, then you don't have any base to rely on at all. All right, one more that I've got, and I think we need to have an uncomfortable conversation about the Second Amendment. So there is a Supreme Court decision coming up about illegal drugs and guns, and I might say something that's going to make everybody mad, very much like Donald Trump on Argentina. CBS News headline: Supreme Court to decide constitutionality of a law barring illegal drug users from having guns. So SCOTUS said it's going to decide whether this federal law that prohibits unlawful drug users from having a firearm violates the Second Amendment. The DOJ is urging the Supreme Court to uphold this prohibition, arguing that there are, quote, narrow circumstances in which the government may burden the Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. Really? Name them. Shall not be infringed. Pretty clear. The Solicitor General, he argued that the firearms ban for illegal drug users complies with the Second Amendment, really, because it seems to be infringing on the Second Amendment. Well, the Solicitor General argues that this law targets a category of people who pose a clear danger of misusing firearms, habitual users of unlawful drugs. He argued the law prohibits gun possession temporarily. That seems like an infringement in my book. The Federal Appeals Court ruled that the law is unconstitutional, so the Supreme Court would actually have to overrule the appeals court. Here's my perspective. I've kind of gone into it before. All gun laws are unconstitutional. Our founding fathers established a Second Amendment. Shall not be infringed. It's pretty cut and dry. You don't have a gun for home defense. You don't have a gun for hunting. Sorry, Senate Majority Leader John Thune, who wants to go out and shoot prairie dogs. Those are all secondary, tertiary, spacebar, ranked 10th on the list of why you have a Second Amendment. You have a Second Amendment so that the federal government, when you have President American Psycho in charge, who wants to go after law enforcement officers for enforcing the law, like Dan Goldman, who's willing, the types that want to use and exploit children to make sure that we have lots of books on the shelves to exploit more children, or use and exploit children so that we can necessarily cause the price of gasoline for your car to skyrocket so you pay a hidden tax. Those sorts who will gleefully come to your door and tell you that you will bend the knee. And they can make, you can point out any of the logical fallacies of all the arguments that they've ever made to them, and they do not care. They don't even care if President American Psycho has his mental faculties, as we saw with Karine Jean-Pierre. They'll just auto-pen whatever they want. You have a Second Amendment because when those folks inevitably come to your door and tell you to bend the knee and you say, well, no, I'm looking at the piece of paper here. It says that I don't have to do that. They will blast you in the face. I know that might not be popular. I know that you can think, well, Hunter Biden, he's a drug addict. He certainly shouldn't have had access. Yes, he should have. We have to look at the overarching reason for the Second Amendment. Any of the logic that you can try to turn yourself into pretzels over and say, well, you know, if you're smoking dope, I don't know if I want you with that. Yeah, well, you know, if you've been to prison before, I don't think you should. Well, guess what? If you don't like an ex-con getting access to a gun because he's quote unquote dangerous, then you should have kept him locked up. If you're an American and you're in this country, you are entitled to have a firearm. Shall not be infringed. All right, I want to close it out with a biblical worldview and a palate cleanse, which touches on illogical and emotional arguments from Mr. John Christ. But before we do, we'll go with the biblical worldview. Quick one, Proverbs chapter 26, verse 4. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Don't even make the case. You're leaning on logic, you're leaning on rationality and reason, and you're arguing with the moms who are mad that their kids quit the football team and they still want to go to the team party at the end of the year. You can't win the argument. It's like taking poison and hoping that it's going to hurt another person. All right. We've reached the end. Here is the palate cleanse, because when it comes to one particular subject, it seems like emotion can cause you to make some logical leaps, and that is college football in the South. Mr. John Christ, he is filling in as every SEC fan watching the games.
Great catch. Great catch. I mean, yeah, he was speeding the other week. Who hasn't gone 95 and a 35 in a school zone at night while drinking, okay? He had possession of the ball and a controlled substance last week, but he had possession. One of our fans did not throw a beer bottle at a ref. What he was trying to do was take the beer from an underage kid, and then it flew out of his hand and must have hit the ref, okay? It's not, our fans wouldn't do that. For the last time, it's called a rumor, okay? He wins games. He didn't get arrested, okay? He was detained behind bars, court ordered for several months, but he's eligible this weekend. They weren't giving stacks of cash to recruits in fast food bags, okay? It's called feeding the hungry. Look it up, Jesus did it. That's not targeting. His parents go to our church. He leads with his heart, not his helmet. He didn't come to the school because the university gave him $6 million, okay? He came for the history and the tradition. They're all straight. They just lead the yells very fabulously, okay? He wasn't speeding, okay? He studied French. He was on the metric system. He didn't know. Female staffer needed a ride home and all he had was a motorcycle. What was he supposed to do? Leave her there? It's called being a good Samaritan. Ever heard of it? Timeout? No, what? This is how I clap. He assaulted someone, but Nick Saban would have given him a second chance. You know who else would have given him a second chance? Jesus.
Well said, Mr. John Christ. All right, guys, that's the end of the American Radicals podcast for today. We'll be back with you on Saturday at 10:30 Eastern time on rumble.com/amradpod. Just a final request, a reminder, if you have not already, please give us a nice thumbs up. Follow the channel, tell a friend or 12 so we can continue to grow on this hobbyist podcast where we continue to just exercise our First Amendment right, not representing any particular arm or department or agency of the federal government, just talking about open source information, newsworthy content, and trying to radicalize as many Americans to learn as much as they can about what's going on every single day. Hope you enjoyed it. Be back with you Saturday. Until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amrad. Pod.